This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. An offshoot of Occupy Wall Street has launched a new movement to bail out the people, not the banks. Coined Rolling Jubilee, activists are raising money to buy distressed debt from financial firms, often for pennies on the dollar, then canceling it so that borrowers don't have to repay. The people who incurred the debt in the first place then get a certified letter informing them they're off the hook. This is how Rolling Jubilee explains its campaign.
The debts we have are not legitimate.
We shouldn't be forced into debt to cover basic needs like healthcare, housing, and education.
We need a jubilee, a clean slate, a cancellation of debts for the 99%.
Here's how we're going to do it. In America, banks sell debt on the shadowy market full of debt buyers. Debt collectors then turn around and try to extort the full amount from us.
That's where the Rolling Jubilee comes in. It raises money to buy the debt.
But instead of collecting on the debts we buy, we're going to abolish it. Poof. Shazam.
Tonight, Rolling Jubilee is holding a sold-out benefit concert in New York to continue its anti-debt fundraising. The group says it's already raised $129,000 through online donations, which is enough to buy approximately $2.5 million worth of defaulted loans due to their steep markdowns. Well, for more, we're joined by Pamela Brown, Ph.D. student in sociology at New School, one of the organizers of the Rolling Jubilee. Well, explain, Pam, how was this conceived and who exactly is getting bailed out?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show, Amy. Right. The Rolling Jubilee was an idea that was floating around for a while, and one of the people in the video we just saw, Thomas Goki, brought that idea to a coalition that we formed earlier this summer called Strike Debt. And Strike Debt arose out of the Occupy Student Debt Campaign, Free University, and Occupy Theory. And we came together and we started to talk, and we realized that debt was really the tie that binds the 99%. It's the intersection of Wall Street and our lives.
So, say more how Rolling Jubilee happens.
Right. So it's really actually a very simple idea, and yet no one has ever tried it before. But debt collectors do this all the time. What happens is that someone defaults on their debt. In other words, they cannot pay it, and the original creditor gives up on trying to collect it. And then a secondary round of people involved in the debt market, which is actually a $60 billion marketplace, decide that they're going to try to collect on that debt. Obviously, it's not worth the original value, so the original creditors sell it for as low as 5 cents on the dollar in many cases, and they sell it to a second round of collectors, debt buyers and collection agencies, and they then attempt to collect that debt. And in fact, they do a pretty good job of it because they make about $12.2 billion a year on collecting what was, in essence, defaulted debt.
Journalist Lindsay Beierstein wrote an article called Rolling Jubilee, How Does That Work? For In These Times. She says the campaign may have unintended consequences comparable to those experienced by do-gooders who bought children out of slavery years ago. Beierstein writes, quote, "The fatal flaw in this model was that the influx of American cash for child slaves drove up the price of children and encouraged slavers to capture more children. If Rolling Jubilee ever got off the ground in a big way, something similar would happen with credit card debt. The credit companies would make more predatory loans, and debt sellers would charge Rolling Jubilee more and more for the privilege of buying up the debt," unquote. Pam Brown, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, so far we've raised about $185,000, and that's by no means an amount that could really impact the system. There's over $13 trillion of consumer debt. So it's an interesting idea. I'm not really sure how it would play out, but I don't think that we're anywhere close to that point where we're really influencing the system that way. And the idea behind the campaign is really to expose the predatory debt system. And also, if you think about it, by buying this debt for 5 cents on the dollar approximately, what we are doing is we're preventing profits, at least at this level. And we're also helping people because people are really suffering. I mean, we've gotten emails from people saying, you know, I can only afford afford to contribute $1. I'm a single mother. I'm broke. I'm being hounded by debt collectors. And we know that this system is incredibly predatory and that it's a racialized system as well. Debt collectors target lower income communities of color regularly with predatory tactics like entering judgments against them in court, things that they cannot defend themselves against, and then they're able to make claim to their bank accounts and any assets that they have. So that's what we're really trying to influence.
If you could, what about declaring bankruptcy as a way to challenge their debt?
There are many ways to strike debt, per se, and certainly bankruptcy is among them. It's not as easy to do that as it used to be, and there are very interesting ways that that system breaks down based on subjective ideas that the judges have. For example, if you read in the Debt Resisters Operations Manual, which is a publication that Strike Debt, the organization that has created the Rolling Jubilee, put out, you can find out that with bankruptcy, it breaks down racially, in part because of just subjective ideas that the judges have, and they, all conditions being equal, will prefer white Americans for bankruptcy protection. And so an African-American family trying to declare bankruptcy may find themselves in a situation where they've paid, because you have to pay to do this, and that they cannot declare bankruptcy ultimately.
Can you talk about the Debt Resisters Operations Manual?
Sure. A few of us got together from Strike Debt and decided that it would be a good idea to try to come up with a mutual aid project where we could both explain our analysis of the debt system broadly, but also have tangible ways that people could use, things that they could actually do to help themselves as individuals as well, while still proposing that we need a collective resistance to debt.
And how does this tie into student debt, since you have been one of the major organizers around that campaign?
Right. Well, one of the things that we learned with the Occupy Student Debt campaign was that one of the criticisms that people leveled against us was that student debt is really challenging to resist, because we've really lost all of the consumer protections that would have allowed you to write student debt off in bankruptcy, that allow you certain protections, really, that, you know, time it out. But right now, student debt you'll have for the rest of your life, and so we realized that, and we realized that also we had to tie ourselves to other debtors. We had to tie ourselves to housing debt, to medical debt, to credit card debt, in order to actually build true economic resistance.
I don't know if you've heard the latest controversial comments of the former presidential candidate, Mitt Romney, but he was recorded in a conference call to donors for blaming the loss on Obama's gifts to various groups, including African Americans, Hispanics, and among the things he said, with regards to young people, for instance, the forgiveness of college loan interest was a big gift. So that's how Obama got people to vote for him.
Right. Well, first of all, that was really incorrect, because along with that package, which kept interest rates for student loans down, we also lost interest rates for graduate student loans. So those interest rates actually went up, and the amount of volume that graduate loans ended up costing people went up, while perhaps the undergraduate education loans went down or stayed the same, really.
Pam Brown, where is Occupy today? This is actually the anniversary of the police moving in on Occupy Wall Street at Zuccotti Park and eviscerating the encampment. But also, we just experienced Superstorm Sandy.
Right.
And you went from help station to help station throughout New York that was being run by Occupy Sandy Relief.
Right. Well, I think that we're at a moment that's really interesting, where mutual aid has really become a very big part of what Occupy is doing. With Occupy Sandy, one of the things that I think that we're going to see is that as this tragedy unfolds, more and more we're going to see that debt is tied to this. We already know that Goldman Sachs has partnered with New York City to offer so-called low-interest loans, which at their core are predatory loans. You have to pay them back within 2 years, and And even though the interest is low, that's virtually impossible for a small business to do. So I think that we're going to see these two strands emerge. We look at debt as really the intersection of Wall Street and our lives. And what's interesting there is that they evicted us from the park, and now this is kind of like a new battleground for resistance.
But Occupy Sandy Relief, what you found in these different areas, what were people doing during the superstorm?
Well, what was most interesting is that just organically, Occupy was able to organize very quickly on the ground and provide real relief to people, provide food and clothing. People were donating all of these things, and the Red Cross wasn't really able to reach out to people in the way that was necessary to distribute those goods, and Occupy really took that on.
It so infuriated the Staten Island Borough President, a Republican, James Molinaro, that he said that people should not donate to the Red Cross.
Yes, and they probably shouldn't. There's online, you can go to Amazon and you can find Occupy Sandy Relief registries, so you can actually donate what people need. One of the things that Occupy has been amazing at with Sandy has been actually going to people, talking to them and saying, what is it that you actually need, and providing that. And that's, I think, what we can do really uniquely. Although, of course, we're not really a relief organization per se, it's really interesting that the networks that we formed for over the last year could really come together in such an amazing way to actually help people in their day-to-day lives and bring some of the ideas that we have about inequality and economic resistance to them.
The website for Rolling Jubilee?
It's rollingjubilee.org, and you can also go to strikedebt.org, where you'll be able to download the Debt Resisters Operations Manual and find out much more about what we're up to.
Pam, thanks very much for being with us. Pamela Brown, a PhD student in sociology at the New School, one of the organizers of Strike Debt, which recently launched Rolling Jubilee. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report.